welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Wednesday, September 11th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start doing some Week 3 previews today. We'll get into Bama at Wisconsin, as well as Boston College going over to Columbia, Missouri to play a big-time game. Top 5 matchup over there in Columbia this weekend. Then we'll get into the Friday night light games. We'll get into UNLV at Kansas, a very, very fun game that you guys are going to want to tune into. And then Arizona at Kansas State, not a conference game. So we'll get into that in the second segment. Two very, very fun games coming up on Friday. Then we'll get into upset alerts. Who's kind of on upset alert going into this week? I have a couple for you. Definitely some teams that do not want to be on upset alert this week because they were last week as well. But let's get into, in the fourth segment, we'll get into all the top 10 teams, where they are this weekend, who they're playing, and what do we need to see from them this upcoming weekend. And then we'll finish it off with a couple of questions as we head into Week 3, a number of them that I want to get off my chest. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that $ at the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network channel. It's a super chat. You can just put in any question, any comment you'd like, and that will pop up on the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here. Great way for y'all to get involved in the show, and absolutely, that's what I want more than anything else. But let's go ahead and jump into these picks, because we're going to do about 2 each segment for the first 2 segments, and then we'll get on with the show from there. But a couple of really, really fun games going on this weekend in very interesting places and very interesting matchups overall, kind of across the board this upcoming weekend. But we'll get into this one to start, and Bama's heading up to Wisconsin, and that is a very, very interesting matchup for a number of reasons. Obviously, we don't get to see these teams very often, especially in the regular season, so that adds to this a little bit, but that atmosphere is going to be incredible. I think there's so many different things going into this game, but Bama obviously coming off a shaky performance. That O-line looks questionable. That back end looks even more questionable. So a lot of things that Wisconsin could... Oh, excuse me, I apologize. A lot of things that Wisconsin could take advantage of in this game, but they have not played well thus far. They have only beaten Western Michigan and South Dakota by 14 points each, and only scored 28 and 27 in those games. So it's not like Alabama's running up against a team that's playing elite level football right about now. So going to be a really interesting matchup, but let's get into some players to watch throughout this game. And I want to start with CJ Williams. Wisconsin needs big plays in this game. There's no two ways about that. They do have Will Paulding, who's a very good player, someone that can absolutely make a number of plays in this game. CJ Williams is the guy that I think is the game changer. He was a 5-star coming out of high school. The guy is absolutely incredible on the outside and has a physical, I don't want to say advantage, but at the very least can stand up physically to some of these Alabama corners. So I think he's a guy that you're going to have to get the ball to early and often, and at the very least get him involved in that offense and then allow the chips to fall where they may. But this is someone that has to get involved because, frankly, a lot of those wide receivers have to get involved for Wisconsin on Saturday. And then, obviously, on that back end, you got to have Hunter Wohler play a huge game. This Alabama team is going to throw the ball downfield. They're going to attack you vertically. And if you can stop those, then you have a really good chance of beating this team, because the reality is, I think we all know that Jalen Milroe, if you force him to stay in that pocket and not get those deep balls, some things can get shaky pretty quickly. So I think that back-end defense, particularly Wohler, is going to be huge for this team, just to keep a cap on everything. Keep everything in front of you and make sure that you absolutely have all of the craziness kind of taken care of on that back end, and make sure that Alabama can't change this game in one play. And then on the other side, Kendrick Law is someone that I've been kind of pointing to for quite some time around Alabama, and Ryan Williams has stolen a little bit of the spotlight, but I still think this is a very important player for what they want to do. I still think that Kalen DeBoer hasn't necessarily tapped into his skill set quite as much as he will down the road, and I think is a very dangerous player, and it might just start this upcoming weekend. Really like him, and I think he could change this game in a second, absolutely. And then we have Tim Keenan III. This guy played incredible football a week ago against USF, was all over the backfield and all over Byron Brown for much of this game. So really, really impressive player. I think you look at this Wisconsin team, if they're not going to run the ball, they're not going to do much of anything. And if Tim Keenan can hold up on the interior, they're probably not going to be able to run the ball. So it's going to be really fun to watch this one. But how can Wisconsin pull off this upset? And I think one of the big things is make Bama one-dimensional. This is almost a must in this scenario because you know how big of a deal that those deep passes are going to be. The only reason those pop up is because the run game is so solid, because they demand so much attention with Jalen Milroe, Jamarian Miller, and Justice Haynes that you can't really you can't sit back and just allow them to throw the ball because then they'll just run the ball all over you. So I think Wisconsin's just got to play really good football up front. They have to be able to stop this run game at least a little bit and keep Jalen Milroe in the pocket because then at least you have a shot. I don't necessarily think it's impossible for Jalen Milroe to dice them up from there. I think he absolutely can, but I do think there's a reality where you're kind of just picking the lesser of two evils in that scenario. You're not picking the running backs that are just incredible running downhill at you. You're picking the quarterback that is a little bit shaky at times that could possibly make a mistake coming at you, and I think that's probably the better way to go about business. And then you got to hit big plays somehow. They have not been good about this through 2 weeks by any means, and they're not necessarily a team that's fully built to do that all that often. But the reality is the Bama secondary got bailed out a couple of times on Saturday. There were a couple of plays that USF missed in the back end of that defense that could have taken advantage of, and possibly if they did, might have made a huge difference in this game. So the reality is you're going to have to attack those openings. Tyler Van Dyke essentially just has to play the game of his life on Saturday and be able to hit those moments when they arise because you're not going to get a ton of them. You're going to get at least moments here and there, but when you get those moments, you're going to have to take them. And then it could be through the run game as well. Ches Malusi and Cade Yakameli, are very talented players and absolutely can have their footprint on this game, but the openings are going to be harder to find running the ball. I think there's going to be openings on that back end, and Tyler Van Dyke is going to have a lot on his shoulders to hit those openings. And then finally, play it from in front. This atmosphere is the equalizer in this game. They can absolutely not play from behind. They are not a team that is equipped to play from behind the way that they want to go about business, even though I'm not really sure how they want to go about business on offense right about now at Wisconsin. But the only time they've trailed is 3-0 to USF. So hit first. Punch them first and see what this team is really about, because the reality is it's still a relatively new team with a new coaching staff that hasn't necessarily been really hit yet. Obviously, that USF game got really sketchy, but let's be honest, if you're in a one-point game with Wisconsin, it's very different than being in a one-point game with USF. So, going to be really interesting to watch that one. Some battles to watch. Alabama's O-line has to handle this game. Wisconsin's D-line is going to be able to at least match their energy, and I think it's one of those things that they're going to have to be able to, at the very least, get some push, because if they can't get a run game going, then Jalen Milroe has a lot on his shoulders that has not been on his shoulders yet this season. And then Phil Longo against Kane Womack is fascinating. Kane Womack is going to come with a lot of pressure, make it really tough on that quarterback, and Phil Longo is going to have a rebuttal. He's going to have something that they're going to be able to go to, whether that's quick passing game or being a little bit more dynamic in the run game, whatever that looks like. These guys have a chess match in front of them, and we'll see how they handle it. And then finally, the Bama front seven against Wisconsin's run game. If Wisconsin can get that run game going, then this game changes very, very quickly. Now, Bama's front seven is not easy to run on by any means, but the reality is if Wisconsin can at least get their foot under them and at least open some of those things on the back end, then maybe they have a shot. But if they can't get this run game going, you might as well wrap it up there. And frankly, I don't know if they're going to get that run game going. I think Alabama wins this one. I think they win it fairly comfortably, and they keep rolling on to that Georgia game in a couple of weeks. But this is one of those games that I think this is going to be interesting for about a quarter. I like Wisconsin, but they are not nearly at the place they need to be to beat an Alabama team like this. But moving forward, we got to get to Missouri, Boston College. Missouri favored by 17 points in this game, over under at 53.5, and this is going to be a fun one. I think this is where College Game Day should be, to be totally honest with you, the only ranked matchup on that Saturday, so going to be a really, really fun one over in Columbia, Missouri, and I think this is really interesting because Missouri has taken care of lesser opponents. Boston College punched above their weight when they beat Florida State and Tallahassee, so two teams with very different expectations coming in, but both playing really good football right about now, and both feeling like they have, at the very least, a shot to make a run at a CFP, so a lot on this game for both of these teams, and for me, you got to watch Treshaun Ward, the running back for Boston College. He was a transfer from Florida State and then went to Penn State, I believe, for a year before making his way to Boston College. This is a guy that can play on a lot of teams around the country. Now, obviously, the time earlier on in his career didn't work out all that well, but they got tons of running backs in that room, and this might be the most talented. So maybe he can cause problems for that Missouri team and open up some openings on that back end for Thomas Castellanos to go just absolutely crazy. And then Kyrie Jackson is another guy to watch. Very good DB for Boston College, and when you talk about the wide receivers for Missouri, it's going to be a lot to handle. So he's going to have his hands full, and he's going to have to be able to deliver in this game. Marquise Johnson is someone I want to talk about for Missouri because we know about Theo Weiss, we know about Luther Burden, we know about Mookie Cooper. They're going to need another guy, and Marquise Johnson is likely going to be that guy. Very, very talented player, very smart player in this offense, and doesn't have to be on the field all that often because of how good the top-line guys are. So I think he's one of those guys that if you get him on the field with fresh legs against some of those DBs for Boston College, maybe he's the guy that changes this game. And then finally, Corey Flagg. Whenever you play Thomas Castellanos, the linebackers on the other team are going to have their hands full. There's no two ways about that. They're going to have to be ready to roll, and they're going to have to make a number of big-time plays throughout this game. So Corey Flagg and all of his friends in that linebacker room are going to have their hands full just trying to keep this guy at bay at the very least. But how can Boston College do this? Thomas Castellanos, that's really the end-all be-all. You have to get that guy on the edge. You have to give his running ability a shot to change this game because that was the thing that Florida State just had no answer for. There were a million different things that Boston College did really well in that game, but the number one thing was Thomas Castellanos was on the field, so you had to worry about his legs. There was no world where you couldn't worry about his legs and he wasn't going to burn you. So Boston College has to be able to scheme that open. They have to be able to scheme him open on a one-on-one situation with one of these DBs because that's about the only good matchup you're going to have in this game for the majority of it. So Thomas Castellanos is a special athlete, but you got to get him out in space for him to be able to beat this Missouri defense. And then force Brady Cook to beat you. This is not an end-all be-all. This is not a guarantee of anything by any means because Brady Cook is a really good quarterback. But at the end of the day, if they get their run game going, you have absolutely no shot to win this game. If Marcus Carroll and Nate Noel get going in this game, Boston College might as well just wrap it up and keep it moving because it's going to be a long day at the office. And then finally, I think keep everything in front of you. We talked about all of these wide receivers from Missouri. They can change the game in an absolute second. And you have a crowd behind you that, if they do, is going to get loud in a hurry. So you're going to have to make sure that these wide receivers are as little of a factor as possible. And that's one of the biggest matchups of the day. The Missouri wide receivers against these Boston College DBs that are good DBs but haven't necessarily been tested to this degree. It's going to be really interesting to watch, and that could be one of the areas that Missouri has a pretty sizable advantage in this game. And then Boston College run game versus Missouri's front seven. I have questions about Missouri's front seven. I think it's a solid group. I think they're really talented, but we haven't really seen them against a really potent running attack. Maybe this is the week where they start to show some of those holes, but at the end of the day, you look at the pure size of the groups in particular, I think you would lean Missouri's direction, but I do have my questions about that defense just as a whole right about now. And then Thomas Castellanos against Corey Batoon, the new defensive coordinator over there in Missouri. You got to keep this guy under wraps. He's really the only guy that can totally change this game for Boston College in terms of he can go punch for punch with your quarterback. There's no two ways about that, and keeping him at bay, keeping him in the pocket is the only real way that you're going to be able to stop this Boston College offense. But I am going to go with Missouri to win this one. I do think it's going to be a little bit closer than people are saying. I think Boston College has enough with Thomas Castellanos in that offense to score a little bit. I think that Missouri offense will look just a little bit out of sync at times with those two games that were relative layups early on in the season. I think they're still kind of getting things going, but I do think Missouri wins this one, pulls away late, and handles business. But overall, these are two games that are going to be really, really fun to watch. Two very interesting games that you would not expect to see in a college football season, and I feel like we have a lot of those this week. But we'll take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to do the Friday Night Lights games. We have UNLV at Kansas, we have Arizona at Kansas State, and those are two of the best games this entire weekend. So I want to break those down right after this, so stick with us.